Hi everyone. My name is Yana, and I'm a Google logistician. I handle delivering a business's target audience with the required parameters, mainly using AI tools in Google Ads. And the main AI tool in Google's ad account, of course, is performancemax. And in today's video, we'll talk a bit of theory about how you can lower the cost per click in performancemax. No one's asked yet about increasing it, but everyone always asks about lowering it. Before we get into the details and nuances of how to do this, I'd like to go over a bit of theory, because it's the foundation for understanding what to do next. Because sometimes even experienced specialists don't understand why the cost per click is so high and why it doesn't go down after increasing or decreasing profitability. Why do people think about lowering the cost per click? Because, for example, they launched a regular shopping ad campaign or faced a situation where the cost per click gradually increased in performance campaigns. In this video, we won't be talking about situations where the cost per click suddenly spikes when you're just starting your performance campaigns. Most likely, there are slightly different issues arising in those cases. So, look, the same elements in the ad rank that affect the calculation of ad ranks in search ad campaigns also influence the cost per click. That's why you can freely Google this in the Google Help Center. It's actually recommended. Look up ad rank and read up on what affects what. There are a lot of factors that influence this. Here, I'm showing a screencast from Google. That's really how it is. It really does have a big impact. Yeah, it's one thing to advertise in Kiev and another in the regions. Or, for example, to advertise right in London itself or out in the suburbs. These are also important nuances, like location, the user's device. Dear Apple users, there are always positive adjustments made for you, even by the automated systems. So people always end up paying extra for you. There are many factors, but if we recall the old theory, which Google hasn't rewritten yet to cover their tracks, they basically haven't changed it. They do change the reporting, yes. They make some metrics outdated or rarely updated, yes. They update those that are rarely updated, but the principles haven't changed. When calculating the maximum price, or rather the actual cost per click, there are two basic indicators that Google will pay attention to. These are your ad rank and your maximum cost per click. If you remember, in manual campaigns, in search campaigns, or, if you didn't know, in regular shopping campaigns, you have the option to set the cost per click manually. That is, you can essentially influence your ad rank by outbidding the cost per click. Well, that's the simple, basic logic of auctions that exist. But in performance campaigns, we can't set the cost per click. It's determined by the performance AI. Let's assume that it can do this perfectly. But ad rank is one of the most mysterious criteria for most people. I'll tell you the following thing. How ad rank is calculated for banner or other types of ads is a slightly different story. We can talk about this separately somewhere, but since in most cases we launch feed-only campaigns, when we want something similar to smart shopping or intelligent campaigns, we will consider ad rank based on the quality score for the search query. Or you could call it a keyword. If you have ever set up a search campaign using basic keywords, then you know there's a column called quality score. This also plays a big role in calculating your ad rank and, accordingly, affects the actual cost per click you will pay. What does this quality score consist of? It consists of 3 elements. These are the quality of the landing page, which is quite a mysterious thing that they actually stopped updating a long time ago. Then there's the relevance of the ad and the expected CTR. Let's break down what these things are. Honestly, when it comes to landing page quality, even back in the days of manual adjustments for million-dollar accounts, Google could never really give a clear answer on how to properly optimize it. Googlers say that you need to improve your site's speed and navigation convenience. Just so you understand, navigation convenience means having a navigation menu bar. You definitely need to have contacts, a catalog, delivery, returns, and so on. But in most stores, that menu is already there. There's also the presence of semantics and meta tags, but sometimes that didn't really affect a good quality score, so we'll skip that for now. If you're interested, I can share a separate, really old manual about how Googlers used to recommend fixing this. But again, I'll say that they pretty much stopped caring about it a long time ago, and sometimes they don't even update these things. Even after you move to a new site, sometimes it just stays the same as it was and doesn't change. we still have two important metrics left: expected CTR and ad relevance. Let's start with the easiest one. Ad relevance. What is it? To put it very simply, it's about how much your search query or keyword appears in the text of your ad. That's how basic and straightforward it is. That's it. All your products are separate shopping ads. So, in order to increase this ad relevance, which, on average, affects the cost per click by about 20%, according to former Googlers, unfortunately, that's not a lot. All you really need to do is add the keyword to the ad text. But wait. If you're selling children's sandals, you don't need to add sandals, little sandals, shoes, slip-ons, or any other similar words to your product titles. It doesn't quite work like that. Google understands the context of keywords and matches them correctly. So you don't need to pick out and add every single exact variant to the title. No, but actually, it's very common. For example, if you're selling, say, paintings, and all your titles are just painting for office. What kind of painting is it? Is it oil, or is it a print on canvas? Is it a Van Gogh, or maybe something original? So you might not quite meet the expectations of what the client is searching for on Google. Yeah. So you need to look at the queries your potential client is searching for. Well, if they're searching for tapestries, then maybe you need to add tapestries somewhere. Of course, not every option, but when optimizing the feed, we focus on the language your client uses, not Russian or Ukrainian per se, but the specific wording they use. If we're describing it in a really basic way, you have a headline, you have a description, where you can add the appropriate semantics in order to do what? That's right, to increase the relevance of the ad. But again, you shouldn't stuff your feed with the same keywords, like buy an elephant, buy a pink elephant, buy an elephant figurine. You don't need to add the whole set. It's enough to just add pink elephant, and that's it, or figurine. Don't go overboard. It should be neat, concise, and readable. The main thing is that it matches the target keywords. By the way, this is one of those things people forget about when they don't understand how to optimize a feed. For some reason, they go into their search ad campaigns or regular shopping campaigns, see the keywords that got either more impressions or more conversions, and just add that keyword. If that keyword is already in the title of your headline or in the description of your shopping ad, there's no need to duplicate it again. It won't actually improve relevance in any meaningful way. But if you notice that the cost per click is steadily increasing at certain points within, say, a 30-day cycle or whatever period you use to analyze your performance, consider that it might be entering auctions you didn't anticipate. It could be showing up for similar products. Similar products are, for example, neighboring brands. Or, for instance, you're advertising a product to reduce wrinkles on women's faces, right? You can reduce them, for example, with those same microcurrents. And you're selling a cream, but it could show up there too. Of course, I don't recommend adding microcurrents, right? If you're advertising creams, but this is a hint for you that it can enter all sorts of different auctions, and might not even show you that block of queries. Regular product campaigns don't show all search queries, and the search query report in performance will hide most of the queries even more. Even if you try to extract something with scripts by IP, it's still incomplete information. You need to be prepared for this. That's why your task is to find where it might be eating up your cost per click. Sometimes it even eats up your cost per click on irrelevant queries. Let me give you one of the most striking examples from my own experience. We were selling women's vests. You know, the kind that are made like little down jackets, but the vests are cropped. Our cost per click was constantly quite high, sometimes reaching 16 or 17 hryvnias. That's really strange. The cost per click should be much lower across all types of ads. So we started looking for what was driving up the cost per click. And just so you know, sheepskin vest was the keyword that had a really high cost per click. As soon as we excluded that phrase, the cost per click in the performance campaign started to go down a bit. This is a vivid example of identifying non-targeted traffic. And very often, it happens that it goes into neighboring auctions, they convert, and it keeps bidding on them. So, you need to think about how to properly describe the semantics so that the performance campaign starts converting. This also gives you an idea of how you can enter neighboring auctions with your own product in some non-obvious product categories, also thanks to the relevance of your ads. Next. If you want to sell something for, say, Valentine's Day, or for some sales, Mother's Day, it also makes sense to add this information to your product titles because, well, it would be very strange to expect that something will sell for Mother's Day when your product is in no way associated with that kind of semantics. That's another little tip or idea for you. Next. So, we sorted out relevance a bit, right? Next. That's why, for example, in auto parts, with certain article numbers, bushings, gators, and so on, you don't really need to get fancy with the feed or the titles, because everything is very clearly targeted. So here's another example for you. Let's move on to the next, second metric in this story, which can affect your bid size by 30 to 40%. This is the expected CTR. Yeah, the expected CTR is like some mysterious black lion that nobody knows how to deal with. In reality, it's a very simple metric. It's simple to understand. Maybe it's a bit tricky in terms of how to influence it, but it's pretty straightforward to grasp. Basically, it's about how good and non-dropping, in other words, stable or growing, your ad CTR is. Why is it simple in its definition, but quite complex to influence? Because, for example, if you have cyclicality in performance and dependence on targeting and analog product dynamic remarketing, then, well, in that case, the CTR compared to other products can be quite low. And in most cases, people make a mistake when they want to increase their CTR. They look at the numbers. For some product it's 2%, for another it's 0.3, for another it's 0.7. They think that if it's below 1%, then that product has a bad CTR. So, they believe it needs to be improved somehow. Again, this is your historical CTR over the lifetime of the shopping ad. That is, whether it's dropping sharply or growing. Of course, Google can, for example, randomly show your super premium product with your, say, mid-plus price next to cheaper products, and your CTR will be quite low. Okay, but it will still test some things, and you need to look at it over a longer period, at least 3, 4, maybe 6 or more weeks, to see how your product was shown overall and what CTR it had. By the way, this whole thing with the expected CTR is one of those factors that can really affect your pricing. If your products have poor quality photos, well, there are situations when people upload pixelated images and hope that it will sell. If the product is blurry or they get too creative with the photos so you can't even tell what's there, whether it's a set or not. Or there are cases, especially in clothing, where the photo is more about the model than the actual product. Or when you end up in a typical situation, for example, where someone is looking for one size, but the photo shows a completely different size of the product. Of course, they're not going to click. There are a lot of these little details that affect CTR. I'm not telling you right now to rush and change your photos or start reviewing everything. No. Your job is to make sure that your product is actually being shown, and that it's being shown in the right place. In other words, you need to pay attention to the auction statistics to see whether you're being displayed or not. But this is also something that can have a real impact on your cost per click, and can help lower your cost per click. I would say, focus more on the relevance of your ad, because that's something you can influence right away. And accordingly, the expected CTR. But that doesn't mean all products should be adjusted to have the same CTR value. No, these are all relative indicators compared to each other. The main thing is that this CTR shouldn't be constantly dropping, and everything else can generally be more or less adequate, if that's what we're talking about. So, if we've covered a bit of theory, how exactly can we influence the cost per click in performance campaigns? And can we actually affect it? What do we need for this? First, launch a regular shopping campaign, preferably for a different product so it doesn't overlap with what you had in performance campaigns, and monitor, at least for a week, a metric called the benchmark CPC. This is the cost per click that you received, or rather, paid on average, for the queries that appear in your search terms. This is important because if your regular shopping campaign generated traffic that doesn't match what your performance campaign targets, then it's not a great test. It's specifically about the search queries for which you received clicks. You'll understand what cost per click your competitors are paying. If you see that the cost per click is really 2 or 3 times higher in performance, then you truly have a problem with your feed quality or you're missing some keywords, so you need to fix something. So, the first thing we do. If you don't know what cost per click you can afford, launch a regular shopping campaign and check this metric. First, 1. Second, if we've checked it and seen the results, you can even do this for individual categories, because sometimes different categories can have different costs per click. Don't average everything out, because, for example, there are situations where you really do need to overpay for the cost per click, and you'll definitely win compared to underbidding. After that, secondly, we look at our CTR metric, at least over 2 weeks, to see its dynamics in this performance. Is it really increasing, decreasing, or constantly fluctuating, meaning there's no real average value? If it fluctuates, then this increase or decrease in cost per click usually averages out to some middle value, which most likely doesn't need to be adjusted yet, because maybe it's A/B testing some types of traffic. If you notice a stable period of increase or decrease somewhere, or you already realize that it's stable but the cost per click is quite high, think about why that might be. Maybe, what should you actually do in this case? At the very least, optimize your own feed in terms of ad relevance. Third, of course, take a look at your CTR. Maybe you have these top products, and top products aren't just the ones that convert. They're usually the ones that get the largest share of the budget. If there are products that are pulling at least 10 or 15% of the entire budget just for themselves, those are the ones you should pay attention to first and check their CTR. If it's dropping or unstable, most likely you need to work on that product. Look, you don't necessarily have to come up with something super creative there. Right, it's really hard to get creative with something like a bolt cutter, but it's still possible. You could try changing the background, right? If you're selling that same lawnmower on a white background, in your merchant center next you have the option to play around with the background. With the help of AI, you can create a different photo and test it out. Maybe you're just another plain white one, just like everyone else, and your price is the same as the others. Add stars to your products. After all, how can people trust you if they don't know whether you're a rated store or not? You see, the expected CTR is influenced by how clickable your ad is. So, besides playing around with photos and testing things in your titles, pay attention to how your store looks in the product listings. Add stars, add reviews, add ratings, add, all sorts of perks like delivery and returns. Maybe you have some more information? Maybe you could launch local assortment feeds as well? You can also play around with the backgrounds of these images just to make your ad more clickable. By the way, a lot of people in performance marketing add this kind of targeting functionality for search-type ad campaigns. You definitely need to add these objects there. Objects are additional links, callouts, and structured snippets. At a minimum, you need to add these 3 types of ads. If you don't have search, then you can relax about these objects. Another important point is that this will help boost your search results. You need to Google your search results, see where your ads are catching up or not catching up. It might happen that you Google a completely different product and see your ad appear. That can happen too. Pay attention to this. And also take a look at the search reports for search queries in performancemax. Try to understand where it's targeting, where it's wasting your budget or not, or even making you money. Another important nuance, of course, is what we've already discussed. This is in an ideal situation, when you've set up your initial budgets correctly, structured your shopping ads properly, and chosen the right bidding strategy, because very often people are constantly making changes to the campaign strategy, sometimes several times a day. All of this, of course, doesn't allow A/B tests to reach completion in this AI system, because the AI is constantly learning. It's always running some kind of A/B tests, either searching for or targeting a new audience that will convert. Of course, if you have very little data in your account, should you really rush to change something, like the backgrounds in your Merchant Center product images or the titles and so on? Maybe you don't need to do that at all, and what you really need is to properly adjust your bidding strategies. Maximize conversions. If you squeeze this strategy too much in terms of budget, and you run it without a limit on the cost per conversion, it might start going after very cheap traffic that may not convert for you at all. You have to understand, there are hot auctions, and then there are the cooler ones, where it feels like a cold wind is blowing. In those places where the cold wind is blowing, usually there isn't much activity or significant turnover. So, if you find yourself in such a situation, try increasing the budget and you'll see that at maximum conversions, the cost per click will start to rise, but that's not always a bad thing. Second, when it comes to profitability, here, it's quite hard for me to give you clear guidance. On the one hand, the higher the profitability, the more, in theory, there should be a kind of average, reasonable cost per click. But that's only if there aren't any outliers in the auction, if I can put it that way. Because if there are players who operate without any profitability limits and just go with their own analytics, since they have fast-moving products, you can end up in a situation where the cost per click has already been high for a long time. And when you raise profitability, of course, performance wants to hit the bullseye, to reach the exact target customer who's in a hot auction and might be willing to pay quite a high price per click. On the other hand, so this isn't a signal that you need to keep increasing profitability. On the other hand, in many cases, the cost per click can be pretty biting, right? It can really bite if you set a rather low profitability. For Ukraine, low profitability is 200 to 250%. On average, for a pharmacy, that's considered quite low profitability. There can also be a high cost per click there, but that's usually because you probably have issues with your feed or it's getting into very broad auctions. Because the level of profitability determines the size or the width of the top part of the bottom of the sales funnel. The lower our profitability, the broader the targeting, the wider the reach, and the more the AI can capture a lot of different types of people, basically. So pay attention to this as well, basically. That's why your regular shopping campaign should serve as a diagnostic criterion for you regarding the cost per click you have. So that's a bit of theory for you, a video, a clip about whether it's possible to lower or influence the cost per click. Overall, I can sum it up like this. There are hot auctions that can be very expensive, but there can be high turnover there. There aren't any auctions where everyone keeps jacking up the cost per click to unreasonable levels and still continues to pay such a high price per click throughout the year. There really can be high turnover there. On the other hand, there are these cooler auctions. I don't call them cool, you can call them whatever you want, where the cost per click can be much lower, but your conversion rate will be lower too, and there might not be as much turnover there. Which auction you should advertise in, whether you should pay attention to the cost per click or not, depends on your break-even conversion rate. You need to calculate your break-even conversion rate from traffic to sales in order to understand what your cost per click should be. And based on this, you need to adjust all your cost per click rates accordingly. Plus, there's another important nuance. Keep in mind that there will always be a threshold bid in certain auctions, below which you simply can't go. Because if you go lower, you'll end up in very cold auctions, or you won't be shown at all. So make sure to factor that in as well. Because of the inadequacy of the strategic long-term targeting period, there are a lot of niches where the cost per click is very high, and as a result, it's not possible to lower it effectively, since threshold starting bids have already been set for that auction, and Google usually doesn't let anyone go below them. That's why there are situations where you simply can't go below a certain bid. And basically, the main thing is for you to know at which conversion rates advertising is profitable or unprofitable for you. And based on that, you should then adjust your feed optimization or your campaigns accordingly.